Prasad. Can you check if Prasad is there?
One second.
Oh, I think, yeah.
Yeah, he's there.
Okay, there he is.
Connections.
What? Okay, sorry. Okay, so Joel, where's Joel? Joel, can we start?
Yes. 1 second. Yes, we can start.
Thanks, Joel. Hello and welcome to the final panel of the Design Symposium titled Psychogrammars of Space at the School of Environment and Architecture. My name is Rupali Gupte and I teach here. So for this discussion, I mean, since it's the final panel and for the sake of an extra institutional circulation, I'm going to also introduce the three reviewers here, friends who've been with us for very long and very closely worked with the school. But Dr. Kush Patel is a faculty member and head of studies for the postgraduate arts program in technology and change at the Shrishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology, Manipal Academy of Higher Education in Bangalore, India. Their research and teaching remain oriented to the theme of survival as both a form and method of historical and theoretical investigations into making just environments across a range of digital and community sites. Current projects include a history of participatory architecture and examinations of pedagogical and archival forms that campus community projects with the digital take to engage struggles against heteronormative and casteist patriarchy. They're also the co-founder of Pedagogy of the Digitally Oppressed, a digital humanities collective that is committed to fostering queer, feminist, and anti-colonial approaches to digital humanities teaching. Their writing appears in Digital Studies, Le Champ Numérique, Knowledge Justice Disrupting Library and Information Science Through Critical Race Theory Public, a journal of Imagining America, and more. Dr. Kush Patel is a registered architect in India with professional degrees and gold medal distinction in architecture and urban design from South Gujarat University, Surat, and Sept University, Ahmedabad, respectively, as well as a Master of Science in Architecture Design and PhD in Architecture from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Dr. Prasad Khanolkar is an assistant professor of geography at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. His research as an academic and urban planner has focused on different Gurgaon, Portland, Nairobi, and Addis Ababa. His upcoming book from Routledge offers a new way of thinking about slums and southern cities based on a grounded engagement with the relationship between media, objects, spaces, and people in the everyday life of slum localities in Mumbai, India. His new research focuses on how Guwahati, as a labyrinth of urban circulations in Northeast, where people move through it with different temporal rhythms while using it in different ways. And Sarovar Zaidi is a philosopher, a social anthropologist. She works at the intersection of critical theory, anthropology, art, architecture, and material culture studies. She has extensively worked on religious architecture and urbanism in the city of Bombay, and currently co-runs a site on writing the city called Chirag Delhi. She's also put a link on it. We'll put another link on it in this panel as well. Previously, she has worked on rural development with a focus on health, education, and women's rights across India, and currently works on religious iconography and modernist architecture in South Asia. She has received the Max Planck Fellowship, the Intact Fellowship, the IFA Fellowship, and the Coach Fellowship for her research interests. Besides this, she also curates an interdisciplinary forum on art, architecture, and anthropology, elementary forms, and has previously taught at the School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi. She currently teaches at the Jindal School of Art and Architecture, Sonipat, India. And so with this, I will introduce this panel. and the students on this panel. So this panel is called Peripheral Sensoriums. And in some ways, it's also a continuation of the last panel, which it drew on the idea of the everyday. But what this panel also does is it speaks of what it is that is privileged in architecture in some ways, and what is it that is left behind in the margins, and how might we then bring this what is left behind to kind of reshape the way we think of architecture and space. And so all of them in some ways draw on this kind of that is marginalized in some ways. So Devanshi Thakkar, when she talks about experiencing urbanscapes, talks about how the idea of what is thought of through the oculocentric, and how do you bring back a kind of idea of senses. But what, again, interestingly, as opposed to much of the phenomenological literature and architecture that speaks through the idea of the lone figure in space. Interestingly, she brings this frame of thinking to a site of a market, and then kind of tries to think of what does it mean to then think through the senses. And so in that sense, kind of interestingly shifts the binary of public and private. And so let's see how that pans out. Raunak Rangnekar specifically talks about the idea that we think through the human-centric imagination. And in that, what we leave out is the idea of sort of, thinking of other species as subordinate, and so how do you kind of rethink this? How do you kind of not work through, he talks about the two spectrums of either disdain for other species, or this idea of, really sort of thinking of the idea of the pet. But what does it mean to kind of open up this imagination of think of other species, as not subordinate to the human? Pranay, in some ways, talks about the idea of the uncanny, and how it plays out in cities, and what does it mean to kind of think of architectural space through the idea of the uncanny. And for him, it's also kind of the idea of the Dérive that he engages himself in the city, through which he kind of brings this idea, the trope of the uncanny, into play. So Pranay with Uncanny City, Dérive through Vile Parle. Himanshi Rathod talks about the architecture of shadows, and again she argues that shadows are seen as effect often in architecture. That's how it's framed. But what does it mean to think of the architecture of shadows and its spatiality? And Jatan again sort of argues that mainstream understanding of architecture sort of is privileged, or sort of focuses on the idea of either the utilitarian or the idea of purity. And that's how it frames it. But he then kind of goes into the archive of dreamscapes and says that these get smudged and kind of completely thrown apart in the space of the dream, because you do not have such neat categorization. The human sort of imagination throws up completely different ways of sort of thinking of space. So if you think of space through the idea of through the dreamscape, then what is it that you then bring back into the imagination of architectural space? So let's, it's kind of, they're long, they're 5 presentations. What we'll do is we'll just take a small break between the two. So we'll do the first 3, and then we'll take a 5-minute break, enough time for reflection and responses, and then we can get back to the other 2. So thanks. And with that, I'll invite Devanshi. Devanshi, you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Rupali. Am I presenting?
Yes.
Thanks. Hi, good evening. I'm Devanshi and I'll be presenting my research titled Experiencing Urbanscapes. Walking down a street for me is a positive means of escape, a break from routine, a way to release all my bottled up emotions of the day. But all the public streets we occupy in our city built to accommodate the various layers of emotions we experience. In the process of walking through a space, we usually go through various physiological shifts like changes in temperature, the smell of a place. Sometimes we even feel the change in textures of various materials, which have subtly impacted our experience of the many public streets we occupy on a daily basis. This is a larger experience that cannot be had just by seeing. Thus, my research question as to how does the physicality of a public street assist the human senses to mobilize the experiences it generates while we are within its space. This research aims to summarize the importance of experiences in perceiving the various spatial configurations of public spaces in the city. Our early interactions with architecture have a considerable influence on how we interact with the built environment later on. People interpret and decode the meanings of spaces based on their own expectations, roles, experiences, and motives. This reflects Henry Lefebvre's belief about how society's spatial practices, which are apparent in people's daily lives, socially produce and sustain places. Phenomenology in architecture is a philosophical look at architecture as it seems in a certain experience. It could be very aesthetic in person, but it is more concerned about the human experience in a particular space rather than just looking at the actual physical space. It is a field of study that focuses on the essence of an experience. Walking in the street means both the researcher and the participant are exposed to the multisensory stimulation of the surrounding environment rather than surrounded in a filtered landscape, as noted by David Howes in his journal, The Senses and Society. James Gibson, in his book, The Senses Considered as Perceptual Systems, states the two distinct meanings of the verb to sense. First is to detect something, and second is to have a sensation, a simulation. Taking from that, here I'm referring to the two meanings of the verb to draw, first being to infer and second to sketch to illustrate the urbanscape. The method undertaken to carry ahead the research is to take walking interviews because it is a place-responsive method. The quantitative data can be analyzed through the routes taken by participants and the qualitative data through one-on-one conversations. Here, to study how experiences get mobilized through the lens of human senses, the parameters I have set for observations are the transactions of passerby occupants with those and that on the streets, and also of the formal and informal vendors with the street during different times of the day. Think of a city and what comes to mind? Its streets, says Jane Jacobs. She claims that streets are the most important urban public spaces because they are where the chance encounters lead to social interactions. Through the research carried out, this thesis tries to understand the organization of informal spaces in the city of Mumbai, for which initially 4 sample fields of the urban public spaces in the city of Mumbai were chosen to study, namely the streets connecting the Sayan Mankud Highway and the Acharya Udyan, the streets connecting the Chembur station to the Sandu Marg, the streets diverging inwards from the Five Gardens to the residential colonies, and lastly, the Dadar market streets in central Mumbai. I will be focusing on the key learnings from this site, reason being the heavy density of occupants throughout the day with varying types of user groups and thus a variety of user experiences that are sought. The following is one of the user experiences of walking through the streets of Dadar Market and Phul Gali. The key user groups on site are those that use the street for transiting from the Dadar station to the Ranade road. Secondly, a crowd that comes to the shop from this market that houses goods in wholesale quantities and prices. And then there are the roadside vendors who spread their items to sell on tarpaulin sheets, and the cart vendors with usually plastic products at extremely low prices, or the juice and fruit plate wallas on the cart. And lastly, the formal shopkeepers. Following is a narration of a few stories of those who occupy street on a daily basis. This is a quick narrative story as said by Reshma Tai, who comes here almost every day to buy fresh flowers, fruits and vegetables. म्हणजे मी बॉर्न अँड ब्रॉट अप मुंबईमध्येच आहे. ही अशी गर्दी चिखल बघून जर मलाच त्रास व्हायला लागलं तर कशी मुंबईकर मी? पण खरं सांगू का, नाही आवडत ते सगळं. आणि इथे आवाज आणि या लोकांचा ओरडाओरडी, कधी कधी तर भीती पण वाटते. पण ठीक आहे, दादर इज दादर, काही पण हो. मी इथे दररोज येते, म्हणजे मोस्टली तर फुल घ्यायला आणि आठवड्यात एकदा कधी फ्रुट्स आणि भाजीसाठी. एक सॅटिस्फॅक्शन मिळतं इथे येऊन. आज तर मी रोजेस घेतले एका बायाकडून, किती चिडलेली ती, बापरे. तिला बघून मलाही चिडचिड व्हायला लागली. पण ठीक आहे, आपल्याला काय. अरे ओ हारवाले मामा, रोज तर तुमच्याकडूनच घेते, द्या की बरोबर भाव. नाही तर ठीक आहे, मग राहू द्या. मी घरी जातच होती तेव्हा मला एक लहान मुलगा दिसला. त्याला बघून एकदमशी दया आली, म्हणून परत रोजेस घेतले मी त्याच्याकडून. तू मला तिथेच भेटली ना. अरे मी नावच सांगायला विसरली माझं, मी रेशमी. This is a quick narration as said by Meghna Rathi, an office goer using the street to get to the main road. I don't know how, but I'm always late for and from work. I'm usually running on the street, figuring out my way to get past these bhaji walas and fool walas. Why do these taxi walas have to park just anywhere? And the ones getting off, bina dekhe hi they open the doors. And I'm always in a rush. So har din, at least ek bar I manage to crash into someone or something. Or batao, why does this bus have to come and stop at the fag end of the street? A bus aayegi, so obviously the others will also crowd the street with their cars and scooters, na? This is a quick narration as said by Ahmed, a street vendor who usually spreads the export reject quality kapde on a tarpaulin sheet on the divider of the street. हम तो यहीं बैठते हैं रोज, शाम को 4 बजे आते हैं अपना गट्ठा लेके मुलुंड से. वो कपड़े जो एक्सपोर्ट में जाते हैं साइड कर देते हैं ना, वही बेचते हैं. एकदम एक क्वालिटी कपड़े हैं, बस कहीं किसी की प्रिंटिंग गलत लग गई होती है या सिलाई आड़ी होती है. पर एक बताओ मैडम, ये पुलिस बहुत तंग करती है, और रोज करे तो समझ भी आता है कि हमारी बैठने की जगह गलत होगी. पर ये तो ना कभी कभार आते हैं, दिन भर का खर्चा पानी निकाल के चले जाते हैं. This is a quick narration of the story of Renuka Kaki as said by Ratnatai who sits beside her. They both spread out their tarpaulin sheets and sell lemons and ginger. हो इथेच बसते माझ्यासोबत. आम्ही सकाळी पलीकडे बसतो स्टेशन जवळ, कारण फूल घ्यायला लोक येतात ना, त्यांना सोय होय म्हणून. आणि दुपारी मग इथे या बाजूला येऊन बसतो, जिथे जागा मिळाली तिथे बसतो, कारण इथून मेन रोड जवळ आहे ना, तर परत लोकांना बरं पडतं. हे रेणुका अशीच तर शांत आहे. ती लिंबूला नीट वाटे लावत बसते पूर्ण दिवस. तिला ओरडाओरडी आवडत नाही, आणि खरं सांगू तर तिच्याने आता होत पण नाही हे सगळं. There are several such other stories through which I observe that the shared spaces between the formal and informal vendors on the street are legal, but their shop extensions are often not. Hence the usage of temporary shading, sitting, and storage objects. Majority of the people that use the street for their transit purposes from the other station to the Ranade Road. And a lot of these people shop by daily, a lot that is required on day-to-day basis. And hence their main focus is to take the route of their rose ke vendors that usually occupy the same spot. And then there are also those who usually never buy, and hence their main focus becomes navigating fastest through this busy street. The formal shopkeepers don't have a heavy load of buyers unless specific to their product season, and hence they're usually on the lookout for genuine buyers. I can thus infer that the existence of all the different noises, smells, and visuals of a variety of products forces users to take specific routes to navigate through the people and objects of the street. Occupancy of the street in certain definitive patterns by various user groups provokes the occupant senses of sound, touch, smell, and vision, which almost nudges them to follow a path different to each that they subconsciously create, which lets them undergo specific experiences. Thank you.
Thanks, Devanshi. So we'll come back to the discussion, because I think what you also sort of introduced is, the moving image somewhere, like the moving image and the voiceover, like you are reading a text that sort of is somebody else's voice. So I think let's come back to this discussion with respect to the others. What does it mean to kind of think through this idea of the video, and how do you sort of privilege like where is the camera located, and so many interesting questions can be asked from here. But let's move to the next one. Raunak Rangnekar. Raunak, do you want to
Yes.
present? Yeah.
Yes. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's coming up. Not yet, huh?
It's gone blank on
It says
my end.
started screen sharing, but it's blank. So maybe you want to, yeah, it's come. But can you do like a full screen?
It's stuck
It
on
is
my
a full.
end. It's blank on
Okay.
mine, and
So maybe you want to disconnect and reconnect.
I'll do that. I'll try again. Sharing
Yeah.
my screen.
Yeah, please.
No, it's hanging for some reason. I don't know why. Could I go after the next person, please?
Sure. Pranay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can come back to Raunak after this.
Still see a screen.
Yeah.
You can see my screen, right?
Yes, you can just go and present more slideshow.
So the thesis is titled Uncanny City, derived through Vile Parle. The following work in its root focuses on the mechanics of the uncanny and how does it reshape the sense of space established through dominant systems. So what I want to argue is that certain epistemological structures have affected a certain appreciation of the world, which makes us perceive the world and communicate with each other in a certain way. The uncanny, through its strangeness, anxiety, fear, absurdity, charm, and anonymity, provokes us to think outside our epistemes of knowledge, thus liberating us from the dominant structures. So my concern is that the uncanny is being erased in current works. There is this sanitization of architecture from, like all the glass boxes to Hafiz contractors' plans for Hiranandani to the JVPD scheme at Vile Parle, all in some sense through their neatness and transparency try to sanitize the uncanny city. The reality of the city is not so neat. In fact, it's messy. And within the landscape of everyday, the architectural uncanny emerges and subverts the preconceived notion and experience of space. What was once linked to one's episteme of knowledge is now shaken and being questioned. And thus my research question is, what are the mechanics of the uncanny and how can they be strategized into architectural processes? So Sigmund Freud first introduced the term uncanny in his psychoanalytical essay Das Unheimliche, that is the uncanny, in 1919. His work became important to trace the etymology of the word uncanny. Heimlich on one hand suggests home-like, familiar, or as what is concealed and kept hidden. The Unheimlich on the other hand suggests unhomely, unfamiliar, or as something which has come to light and revealed. Thus, you can see the adjectives heimlich and unheimlich are antonyms, but also synonyms. Thus, paradoxically, both the terms gives rise to the same definition, the double term unheimlich. So for my thesis, the uncanny is taken as a metaphorical trope, almost acting like a lens that provides a new reading of the city. The uncanny can be broken down into further tropes which help to understand its complexity. The first trope being that of the vagabond. And the vagabond almost sort of had this double face in modernity. One was this simple French translation to whatever strays, this social and legal construction of the bourgeois society, which labeled a person as the other. The other role, which I would like to focus on, was rather figurative and was that of the rebellious poet or the bohemian. Anthony Vidler, in his book Architectural Uncanny, suggests we look at them as strangers that invade the host cities like a band of ruffians. They become like an original carnival that overturn daily routines, commonplace thoughts, upsetting hierarchies, and crowning fools. The second term is that of darkness. So many practices and spaces get labeled as dark due to a certain dominant structure, mainly techniques of spatial planning, territorial mapping, and of invasion and surveillance. The darkness that these spaces and practice get associated with shouldn't simply be considered as the absence of light. It is the darkness that also lies outside our knowledge structure, giving rise to a certain obscurity. The third trope is that of the energetic self. Quoting Prasad Shetty and Rupali Gupte, cities become composites of small forces, of energetic selves, friendships, and compassions. The energetic self here is the dimension of the self that drives one to undertake specific activities connected to one's desires, free from the influence of this dominant structure. The fourth trope, which is that of transparency. Transparency as a trope to read the uncanny has to be understood in opposition to it. Modernity has sort of been haunted by this myth of the transparency. And what it evidently tries to do is like make things clear and thereby create these boundaries through the line. And the line not only creates social hierarchies, but also in a sense sort of fixes our gaze. The fifth and the final trope, which is that of the unconscious, brings out this idea of the repression. And in the moment of the uncanny, the sense of time gets disrupted as it becomes a montage of past, which is sort of the repressed parts activated through various signifiers, and the present, which is the physical reality. And this also helps us to understand the dialectic between the familiar, that is the repressed, and the unfamiliar, which is the physical, for the provocation of the uncanny. So the mode of representation is that of a film, which is basically a dérive through Vile Parle. As explained by Guy Debord in the theory of dérive, the dérive is a practice where you, for a certain period, drop your relations and motives for movement and action, and let yourself be drawn by the attractions of the terrain. So the film basically becomes a psychogeographical map, and using the idea of montage, different images, videos, sounds on the site, movies and documentaries are stitched together to provide an experience beyond the limitation of a one-dimensional model of looking.
Pranay, I don't think there's sound.
There is sound.
You need to share, go to your share screen and click on your share screen and वहाँ पे share sound का option होगा. On your Zoom का नीचे that
next to the mic button, where it says mute, you just kind of hit that arrow and it will tell you select speaker and select microphone. I think select speaker.
Okay, select speaker is same as system.
Yeah,
no,
you have to say
no, but you'll have to, Pranay, you'll have to go click on your share screen and you'll have to share the presentation. Click on your share screen and वहाँ पे एक option आएगा नीचे, last left corner, optimize sound for
if you don't find it there, Pranay, there will be 3 dots on the, like you'll see a panel which has the mic, the video screen and all of that, right?
Yeah.
There'll be 3 dots there, not this, of the Zoom ka panel.
Go to more. No, the panel that is there. Just start.
Oh yeah, 3 dots, more.
Yeah, in that click on share sound.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Zoom is...
In this city marches an army whose motto is
we're living in a very competitive world today as compared to 30 or 40 years ago. Everything is highly competitive. Would you like to answer that, Paul? This is my line, and I love it.
We believe warmth and brightness will return, and renewal of the hopes of men.
No.
I want to be an individual, so I'll do something holy. I would say that's really a dangerous thing. If the only thing you can think of to express your individuality is an art,
words, we are suffering from everybody wonders about what the future will behold, what's ahead of us. But if you feel well, you know inevitably whatever's going to happen, you feel well anyway.
There's nothing more enjoyable. I think I know now.
Right ahead. But I'm afraid it's going to be just like
60% of people under the $500,000 a year bracket buy them.
It's good to know that there's a sense of cohesion and purpose on this.
A girl who makes $30 a week buys them. Buy them. The difference between feeling.
Hello.
What do you want?
Hello.
Yeah. So coming to the conclusions, the vagabond is also sensibility or imagination that provides a different reading of the city. Thus, to have a vagabond imagination is this to be this rebellious poet contradicting and poetizing life. So the first inference is this that of the forest, and like in a dense forest, each plant and organism gets dependent on each other, and as the plants grow, they change the direction of other plants and vice versa. The forest becomes a study of the ontology of space. It questions the nature of space, space which is highly networked and nuanced and seen as an assemblage of everyday objects, practices, friendships, power dynamics, relationships, and subjectivities. So for instance, there is a man on Vile Parle Market Street that sells dabelis. However, due to the lockdown restrictions, he was required to take down his practice. What seems interesting that due to his friendship with the rickshaw driver, they worked out a deal and he sort of camouflages a shop inside the rickshaw. And you get a hybrid 3-wheel mobile dabeli shop. You also get this space of gathering right in the middle of the street. The second inference is that of dark spaces. And as mentioned earlier, many practices and spaces get labeled as dark due to a certain dominant structure. However, through the Flaneur walks, these dark spaces were discovered. These spaces wouldn't have been accessed if the walks sort of had this intent of usefulness. So for example, while strolling through the Irla market, I passed a shop with a huge shutter. As I moved forward, I came across a lane on my left, which was a dark and narrow lane. And as I entered the lane, I could hear some music being played at a low volume. I went deeper into this labyrinth-like space, taking right and left turns to find its origin. As I went deeper, the amplitude of the music increased until I arrived at this chai shop. The chai shop in this dark alley had a bench squeezed on its side where few customers were sipping chai and enjoying the music. Being curious about the source of these customers now, I decided to climb a staircase, which was in the corner, and I reached a corridor. The corridor sort of had a grill on one side, which faced a part of the labyrinthine space from where I had passed. On the other side, it had windows that overlooked the space where foreign and Indian currencies were exchanged. At the end of the corridor was a door, and as I passed through the door, I entered the first floor of the same shop with the huge shutter. The third and the final inference is that of architectural monsters, and similar to John Heidegger's monsters, they invade the network space and bring out newer relations. They become these reinventions of everyday objects which create a sense of charm, and therefore everyday objects, situations, and environments are transformed into a new form with a new aesthetic vision. So for instance, there's this practice of selling weed that camouflages with this ambulance near the station. or this huge trolley-like shop on Illa Market, which becomes this hybrid between a cloth seller and this huge shopping trolley. Or as spoken earlier, the Dabli seller inside the rickshaw. So these objects and spaces become these interesting hybrids of existing meaning and relationships. And this is the resultant network diagram. I would like to conclude with this. Thank you.
Sorry. So thanks, Pranay. So again, it'll be interesting again to, in your case also, to bring in this idea, this discussion of what does it mean to kind of, you work with these two things, right? The network diagram, which sort of is layered, and then there's the film which you're trying to kind of look at through this idea of the montage, no? The montage of the still image, the moving image, and sound. And how does that kind of help you draw out a certain sort of understanding of space, and then how does it connect to the last three tropes that you're kind of building, the idea of the forest, the idea of dark spaces and architectural monsters. So it'll be interesting to kind of bring back that, bring the discussion in the end again. Yeah, so we'll move on to the next one. Raunak, are you ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
My screen is visible now?
Yes, it is.
Great. So over the past 5 years of volunteering as a field nurse for street animals, I have observed the condition of them in varying typologies of spaces within the urban. A series of relationships humans share with these animals are noted, but I noticed that these relationships and their quality and meaning differ across varying types of spaces, kinds of people, types of environment for the animal. What is the reason that such stark differences exist in these relationships? This is a question that has been bothering me for a few years now. So, to my understanding, the street animal accommodates itself in the urban, devouring organic waste disposed carelessly on streets, adjusting itself within a human-centric landscape. An extremely intricate, complex social arrangement develops from the interspecies relationships. The arrangement is a product of interspecies interactions in the urban. Now, this spans across regulating policies, cultures, economic and religious disparities, and all these other parameters. Now, the thesis aims at making sense of these interspecies relationships. What are the parameters that affect them, and how do they thrive in the metropolitan? Several readings were referred to for a nuanced understanding of how street animals perceive the urban. Books on the psychology of street animals, their behavior and reasoning, the way they perceive humans with whom very often, if not always, they share spaces and resources. The important points were noted for referring to further while studying, which included pointers considering their dominant sense of smell, the way they recognize humans through smell, and subsequently the items humans possess, like footwear, furniture, and such. Behavior traits like the fact that an animal would preferably search for a cooler area and not dig one, or their allomimetic behavior of having a subjective understanding and learning from past events like a cacophonous crowd, movements of humans that show they might attack, or on the contrary, that they might be friendly and might give food, or spots of garbage dumps which they could depend on for food. Series of narratives emerge from the interspecies social arrangement evidently present in the urban. This intricate relationship of dependency thrives on the existence of certain enablers. These enablers may be shared commodities, spaces, resources, and such. So the first step in the research was to identify the enablers and make sense of several narratives that I have come across. I divided them into 4 categories. The first one is the business narrative, where the relationship was developed through the enabler of conducting business, as seen in these examples. So one of them can be at Satrasta, the fish market that gets set up. So out there, the smell of the fish draws a lot of cats, and automatically a kind of friend-like relationship develops between the shopkeeper and the stall owner and the cats. The second one is called tool narratives, where tools which are abandoned or parked on the street, how are they used by animals? So what I did is I noted the duality of their utilitarian nature. I identified their usefulness to street animals and accordingly noted them down. The third one is related to human interventions, where animals are purposefully allowed to live in coexistence, or a bond is shared amongst the species, allowing a very complex and a very nuanced relationship. The fourth one is of relating to rejected spaces. Out here, I am expanding the vocabulary of the word stray to also include humans, spaces, etc. So these are the spaces which, due to the humans' ergonomics, they are difficult to occupy, but they're perfect for street animals. So they are stray spaces, so as to say. For example, here at BKC, cacophonous constant movement of traffic on either sides of the road, a lot of footfall on the pavement. So this is the kind of spot where the animal occupies, which is on the divider. Now there was research done research was conducted to figure out a way to map the ways in which animals perceive spaces. So based on their sense of smell, notion of fear, of friendship, of food procurement and such. After that, the method to map was that the first thing which was done was to create a 3D model to replicate what is there on site. The next thing is notional bubbles, or these nodes were marked in the 3D environment, which is a layer of notions of perceiving through the lens of a street animal. Now, the moment you isolate this layer, it creates a landscape of perception. So now one does not see the site as a physical form, but rather as a landscape of notions which holds plethora of said notions. At any point, now these nodes which are marked, they're constantly moving in real time. So a human which will have a notion of fear is constantly moving. So that notion will interact with a notion of food procuring, and accordingly this very complex landscape gets created. This complex landscape, if at any point is stopped, there are all these moments that one can identify. Based on that, one can identify where an animal will move or what path they will take. The second thing is a very physical aspect, which is thermal comfort, which after a lot of readings and research and experience, I've understood that although there are two synonymous spaces of, based on their psyche of how they understand, they will still choose to go to a certain space. So why is it? There were 4 case studies that were done. I will quickly go through them, and I will go through one in a longer. So the first one, the dog's name is Chappal Chor. This is near P. DeMello Road. He came to this lane a few months ago, and he ended up staying there. Now this delinquent, what he does is he takes the chappal of individuals, he runs away, bites them, and then brings it back. But there is a sense of friendship. It is not sympathetic at all with the dog, but so they will slap the dog also, but they'll let the dog sit with them and such. So they kind of share the space. The second case study relates to a dog named Lali, who is near our WSD kennel. So she, Welfare of Stray Dogs, the NGO. So she was brought to the kennel around 2018 or 19 from Lalbagh. So her place of residence is around 5 to 7 kilometers away. And she was brought here for sterilization. After she was discharged back to Lalbagh, she figured her way back. And she settled now in Mahalakshmi. So she gets along well with the other dogs in the territory. She, looks after the cats in the area who get fed by one of the feeders in that area, Kishore Bhai. And the next case study is relating to this family who resides on the road near Metro Theatre, Marine Lines. So they take care of this one female who's given birth to a few pups across the road at Azad Maidan. Now, if either one wants to meet the other, the pup wants to meet the female and vice versa, this lady takes them on the scooter and helps them cross the road. But they're sharing a home, it's a very complex relationship where someone is staying in your own home and you consider them as a gharwala individual. The fourth case study is where I am allowed to expand the vocabulary of the word stray, where on footbridges or at railway stations, they are where I see them as human-centric landscapes. On a footbridge, the space which is left over on the sides, where there is no footfall or minimal footfall, is where a street dweller or a street animal will occupy that space. So those are stray spaces, so as to say. Now for each case study, what was done was first, the animal's movement was mapped. So how will the animal move? What is it actually doing? So that was charted out by, being around the dog or looking at it and observing the animal. So this is outside the kennel, the dog Lali that I mentioned before. She'll go, the kennel manager comes to feed the cats and such. Then she'll eventually go and find a niche and rest there. The next step is to mark those notions. So create this kind of layer where you put that layer on top, where all these notions of fear, notions of familiarity, of food procurement, of friendship, all of them are marked on the map. And immediately the next thing would be to isolate that layer. So now the physical form is taken away, and it's just this notional landscape to understand the psyche of the animal. This landscape is constantly moving in real time, where on the right you see this individual who is, that's the notion of food procurement. So he'll come and give food to the dogs and the cats. This is where she goes to the garbage dumps in the evening. So there's a constant movement of these notions, and they're constantly interacting with each other. At any point, if this notion movement is stopped on that landscape, we can somewhat predict or understand what would the movement of the animal be like. We can extrapolate approximately. The second thing, of course, is thermal comfort, to prove why, when there are similar spaces, synonymous spaces, is it that the animal is specifically going to that area and sitting? Because, like I said, they would prefer to be in a cooler space rather than dig and make one. They will look for one. So once we compare all these cases, the first case has these varying patches of notions, making the space an olfactory excitement. It's always perilous or always exciting. There's always familiarity, but there's always fear. It's constant excitement, constant fight and flight. In the second case of Lali at the kennel at Mahalakshmi, it has very distinct spaces. It's as though humans themselves have marked these territories, and the animals find their space accordingly. The third one has a very distinct, you see a lot of familiar tones of yellow, but very little spots of red, which also we can look over, because that's the cars that are moving and the lady helps them cross the road. So that notion of fear almost is not present in that case. And the fourth one has a very blatant pattern, where you have footfall in the center of the footbridge of the railway station. On the sides, you have familiar individuals, which are the familiar tones, which are the individuals who are residing on the street. And there is places where they can procure food, which is the garbage dumps and stuff. So the first case, like I said, there's constant fight or flight making decisions, because there is so much happening in that area, constant movement, constant footfall. So it becomes exciting for the animal in either way, be it, being scared, timid, or excited. The second case of Lali at Mahalakshmi, the feeder and the caregiver are the enablers, which allow an attachment to form for humans. The animal finds its way around in a highly dense, highly moving space, but they do that because there is constant that notion of familiarity or food procuring and such. The third one is, like I said, the gharwala, where the female shares the space, the house with the family. The pups share the space, and so automatically all the dangers that they perceive is very limited, is infinitesimally small, because the kind of interspecies relationship is extremely meaningful. The fourth case study is relating to the railway station, which, like I said, is a blatant human-centric landscape. So the kind of spaces that they occupy would be under a footbridge, on the sides of the footbridge, or under a staircase, or under a handcart, spaces which, because of a human's ergonomic, they might not end up occupying and such. The thermal comfort analysis again helps to prove the fact that there were certain spaces why they occupied it. So if you couple both of them together, we can make sense of these things. So from this kind of study, I inferred that firstly, the desire for a clinical geometric city curbs interspecies interactions. The interactions get diluted as the enablers are reduced or are of a derogatory tone. The second thing I realized is that concretization invariably makes the metropolitan city an olfactory bore. So an animal has no sense of cleanliness, but there is that kind of tabula rasa needs of a human, where you want to clean everything, is not something that an animal will be able to relate to. There's some interesting practices that start to emerge in the city with respect to animals. So there are these relationships where they are okay with the street animal, they're indifferent as long as their paths don't cross. So then there are these absurd practices where, they have these bottles filled with red colored liquid, with the assumption or the superstition that red color is something the animal is allergic to, which ironically, the red color does not come in their vision spectrum. but very interesting where they're okay if the animal is not in their sight, or if their poop or whatever is not within their vision. An afterthought, I would just like to touch upon several points which are addressed during the thesis. There is scope to not only expand the vocabulary of the word stray to humans, spaces, objects, and not restrict it to street animals. There is also an opportunity to question the idea of a pet, where sympathetically certain life forms are objectified and taken in, while some others are not validated, and especially ones which are individuals belonging to the same species. For example, dog. You have some which are pet, and you say some which are street and dirty. There is an affordability of businesses, objects, individuals, which allows a duality, so as to say. So there is an interesting affordability of their utilitarian purpose across species, and that is something that I would like to explore in my design part of the thesis. Thank you.
Thanks, Raunak, for opening up a whole world of, the world beyond the human. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions in terms of, how do we understand, how do we engage with this world? So I think it'll be a good discussion to have. With that, we finished 3. So Kush, Prasad, Sarovar.
Isn't there one more person?
No, so there are 2 more people. So one suggestion is to have like a small break of something like that before these 2. So what do you want? Do you want to kind of reflect and then take a short break and then come back to the next 2?
Or could it just be just 2 minutes of just
sure,
just sending stuff and then continuing?
Yeah. Sure.
Who's going first? Just one thing on names. Shreyank, the names, order of names in the mark sheet and the order of presentations was different, right?
No, it's the same, no?
No, yeah. Abhi Raunak presented right now. But his name is second.
Correct. He had a problem with his.
Yeah.
Just that got flipped because he had a problem with his whatever screen.
And then there was Pranay. Pranay is the eerie, right? Sorry guys, I'm very bad with this.
Pranay is uncanny.
Uncanny, huh?
Yeah.
And Devanshi is the first, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So do we give a comments now or do we wait?
We can start if you want. I mean,
I have 2 things to say to. Okay, firstly, Raunak. Oh my God, fantastic! Where are you? Who are you? Okay. So much work, so much. Like you really have to be obsessed with it to get into so much detail. And do you have pets?
I'm sorry. Do I have pets? You asked.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call them pets. They just, in the area started feeding one, and few have started coming.
No, that was really great. And it was also very interesting how you moved between humans and animals and space. And I really think you should write a book at some point in your life. The amount of, also you have a detail for, you have a, because it's something that you did voluntarily from before. Your relationship to your subject of study, of course, was different. And it'll be interesting for you to look up some of the literature on what is called the Anthropocene in anthropology. I mean, it's kind of boring literature, but you should look at it to familiarize yourself with some of the language and the debates in this. There is also Radhika Govindarajan's work, which will be interesting for you. She's looked at cows and their relationship to people. Also would have been interest, like if you were in Delhi, there was no way you would have ignored the cows. We have, like, North India is like the whole road is a cow shed basically, and abandoned cows and cows being fed and cow. So be interesting to contrast it with this relationability of people's space to other animals beyond dogs. And the cow thing opens up a whole other world also. I mean, very similar, because you've got the categories. You've got the categories of everyday, you've got the categories of care, you've got the categories of repulsion and attraction. You you can work with these with other animals. So great, thank you. I have to say one more. I will speak about Devanshi later, but I want to say something to Uncanny. Uncanny, where are you? So I think it was a very interesting framing to think of the uncanny, especially in a city like Bombay, where you go from, if you live in Dadar and you go to Dongri, you're already in the realm of not being able to understand what is going on in some ways. Also, I felt that you moved too fast between trying to grasp the uncanny, whether it is that story of the exchange shop. Something as simple is if you've taken a train at night in Bombay and an empty compartment. I mean, I don't know if I can say this on a jury, but really fat jati hai kabhi. The thing is, like, women's compartment at night, like, I have got spooked and I'm the only person in it. And there's no reason to get spooked. And I've literally run from the women's compartment to the regular one. So what I'm trying to make you say is that even the most familiar can suddenly turn to the uncanny. It depends on time and day. And there's this very fantastic book called Empires of the Dark. I should find it for you. I'll send it for you on the side. It's a very interesting book about the history of cities through, in a sense, darkness and light and the whole known and unknown kind of idea. And also the places that, मैंने पहली बार सुबह से word place use किया है, अभी तक मैं space use करी थी. So the places that can turn to, like you can walk past a house in an old area and there's the associative notion of the eerie is there. And maybe it's just actually just normal. It's just, but because you associate it with, like, like a violin coming out of a Khusro Bagh window, and for other people it's normal, and maybe for you in the night it's strange. So what will be interesting for you is to map this notion of the strange, the eerie, the uncanny, and hinge it on things like the ordinary uncanny, the night. Also, have you read this book called Murder in Mahim by Jerry Pinto?
No.
It's a very interesting book because it's a history. It's a history. It's a kind of a. It's like one of my favorite books because I think it's a history of gay Bombay of 80s, and it's about cruising places. It's about public toilets. It's about how people were scared to go to public toilets because they were places for cruising for trans people and others, and some people are not scared and some people were. So, oh my God, I ordered chai by the way. So what will be interesting is to read this also through fiction. Because Bombay is like over fictionalized. Look at it through fiction, look at it through cinema. Like chase scenes in films, ये इलाका ऐसा है, वो ऐसा है, क्योंकि आपके लिए तो पूरा production हो रहा है इसका, reproduction and production. So like moving between. 1 minute, sorry guys, please continue. I'll just join again. I have to open the door.
I thought Sarovar said she doesn't order things and now she's ordering chai. The most uncanny. Does anyone want to continue? Or we wait for her? I think she's back. Okay, maybe maybe somebody should continue. I don't know if she's probably going to take some time.
I might just come in here. It's an interesting sort of last set of presentations, right? Which brings together so many threads that we've been talking, at least I've been sort of engaging with over the last day and a half. And truly, I think all three presentations really push the boundaries of representation and think through questions of research, but also one's place or connection to what you're researching. So yesterday I was asking all of the students is what's your relationship to what you're studying, right? And that comes through very clearly here in all three works, whether it's Raunak's, Pranay's, or Devanshi's. And such sort of personalized ways of studying these otherwise familiar spaces of the city. So I think I do want to sort of acknowledge that you've really been able to think of research as an embodiment and something that travels with you. And it's interesting that so many of the metaphors that Pranay you were using, whether it's the Dérive or sort of moving through the city and experiencing its strangeness, or questions of understanding the relationship between animals. And at the same time, Raunak, I really appreciated how you were also concluding on this very sort of critical note of not call them pets. So what does it mean to call an animal a pet? And what does that signal in terms of the relationships or the hierarchies or the values that we place on animals that are, quote unquote, proximate to us and those that we would not want to be near. So thanks for bringing that real sort of understanding of, in so many ways, the personal as the political, even though none of the projects really spell that out, but it is really coming through. And even in Devanshi's experiencing Urbanscapes, where you're walking through these places and really taking time to center very intimate conversations, although you were narrating them in your voice, but then there were recordings of actual conversations, just to be able to sort of understand what sense making might look like, right? So your thing was about senses and navigating with senses and creating a kind of a network diagram with senses, but in your voice. And what does it mean to sort of then translate that? So I really appreciated that as a gesture, although I was wondering as to why not sort of have those voices themselves be represented, because you're already doing the work of representation when you're bringing together these otherwise disparate locations and contexts. But then why not sort of center the actual conversations and the sounds? So I was just curious as to what went into making that decision in your research. Pranay, there's an interesting text on the queer and canny, and I'm sort of referring this text also because I really love the way you're sort of thinking through different tropes and also arriving at different ways to think about relationships to architecture. So this idea of the forest, dark spaces, the architectural monsters, it's a kind of a fictional retelling of the space of the city. But what Queer and Canny, it's a text which actually has a chapter on space and place as well. And what I want you to do is to really push to the limits of the uncanny, that it remains sort of, dare I say, an oddity. It's something which within queer theories, within sort of queer experience, the uncanny is embraced as the real experience of the city. And it's an embodiment that you travel with, but you claim as your own, without any of those spaces ever being anything other than dark spaces. So there's a sort of embrace of these darknesses or the normativities that you're explicitly countering. So continue and push it to its limits, because that would allow for keeping the city literally tensed and stretched to its imaginative capacities and potentialities, but also allow you to then think of where and how might somebody like you position yourself, and deliberately so, intentionally so, create that sense of margin for yourself. And likewise for Raunak, again, just wanted to echo Sarovar's compliments that I think this is perhaps one of the few works which really looks at the relationship not in a kind of sort of objectifying the relationship, but it's really sort of looking at how the subject of study is also the very subject of life that you are wanting to portray. And yeah, I mean, I know, there's a sort of an attempt at kind of representing them through film, through different notational colorations and what you call them notional drawings, right? Of what seemingly might start appearing as a relationship. But the question is, what are the limits of that, in the sense that, yes, it would allow you to start identifying, again, moving away from the affordances literature and start identifying different relationships between the physical and the inhabited. But what is it about, who is this research for? What is it that you want to draw attention to? Is it drawing attention to the place of human and more than human worlds? Is it a sort of a drawing attention to the very world building, but world building which does not reproduce this man-environment binary or the dichotomy or the tradition of thought, but sort of really opens up a kind of a post-humanist sort of opportunity and an understanding of architecture? What is it that you're sort of moving towards, if that's something that you might want to reflect on? So I'll pause there, and I think we'll come back to it in different ways as well. Yeah.
Would it be possible to answer Dr. Kush right now, please, in just a minute?
Yeah, Raunak, please feel free. Yeah.
Sure.
Great. So it's just something that I've been trying to figure out. Why is it that these relationships differ, and that sometimes they just dilute at one point, and they have like the quality of space has connotations with respect to these relationships. So if you say consider a slum which gets, in that area itself becomes a rehabilitation, and then you have your sale component right on the side. So if you look at it in a chronological manner, okay, before and after, slum and your tall tower, the human gets distanced from the animal, everything gets concretized. Whereas on the other hand, on the contrary, in the slum, there is a solid relationship that they share. The animal is constantly passing. When it rains, they enter the house, and it's not one of sympathy, which you spoke about, of a pet. You don't, you never hear these kind of comments. Oh my God, look at this, poor cat. They'll slap them. The cat will attack them. But at the same time, you'll see them sitting on the same chair, and these are powerful images that one sees in these specific regions with respect to specific people belonging to a certain economic section. But the moment this tower typology comes in, or the moment you concretize or urbanize, I'm just loosely using this word in a generic manner, that relationship becomes very dilute. So it is something that I'm trying to figure out. I will keep your points in mind, but my
Raunak, I wanted
primary.
to just add one more thing to your thing.
Yes, please.
Sorry for interrupting. But look at also things like you mentioned cats. Look at goats in Bombay. Goats have a unbelievable relationship because you will find people keep goats. Technically, sometimes they have to, do the Qurbani on Bakri Eid, but they keep it like 1 year, 2 years in advance. And some of them don't even go to the Qurbani because they become so attached. And then sometimes they will hit the goat, but sometimes they will be, this thing that you said with the cat, the same cat that they're getting irritated at. It's not this kind of sanitized relationship that one sees of pets on Instagram, right? It's a very different form of relating to the man-animal zone. If you want, you can read this work by Shahid Tayyub. He worked on Bombay on goats. And the kind of man-animal relationship between goats, production of meat, and how people are like obsessed with their goats in some ways. Yet at some point they have to let them go, and there's this whole drama. There's this man who's to keep howling because he let his go. And they keep also this notion of personalizing, names of street animals is also there. They also personalize. It's not like they don't personalize.
True.
Sorry, please continue.
I'll just finish answering Dr. Kush that the primary aim was to ensure that, say, as a planner or an architect, I myself plus other individuals can be more sensitive to this. So whatever they plan on doing or plan on constructing or plan areas, they should be able to be sensitive to the kind of spaces, kind of relationships that are there, and be empathetic and not sympathetic. Of course, that's what we've spoken about. Sarovar, you spoke about cows. I have intentionally restricted to only dogs and cats in the urban, what we call stray animals, and not cows, because it gets a lot more complex. Where I understand in Delhi, so you have the Mackay Foundation and a couple of them in Delhi, which not only do dogs and cats, but they consciously look at cows and all as well. Their way of operations are very different, these NGOs. I'm specifically looking at dogs and cats because cows, we have something like a cow mafia, where in the mornings these people who you see these individuals with the cows outside mandirs and everywhere. You give them money, you feed the cow, go in the morning, pick up this cow, earn, and then give the cow back. So it becomes a different practice altogether. I didn't want to get into that. Again, about goats, very interesting point, but they're tied up, they're sharing the same space, but they're restricted, whereas these animals have that kind of freedom, the dogs and cats. That is why I specifically restricted the thesis with dogs and cats. Very interesting points. I'll keep this in mind. Thank you.
Raunak, very quickly, Anne Galloway's work, it would be a good reference. Anne Galloway is a design ethnographer who explicitly works in multi-species relationships, and Anne is in New Zealand, but they talk about the relationship with sheep and how that becomes the sort of the structuring sort of thread for what actually Anne brilliantly sort of points attention to how in design scholarship often even the most well-meaning that talk about these relationships of the human and the non-human often end up with a kind of a behavioral understanding of space and occupation. And in her sort of work towards world building, she draws attention to structural conditions that actually structure not just relationships, but also provide opportunities for one to intervene on to continue to restructure a kind of
interesting
a world. So do look into Anne Galloway's work. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks. Thank you.
So maybe we can, Prasad, you can have maybe a couple of, no? I can't hear you. You're mute.
No, I mean, I didn't really write anything down. But I mean, there were maybe just 2 or 3 things that I found important to be paid attention to. these are questions. I mean, all the three projects are sort of exploring questions of an anthropological understanding of space and the city at its limits in some sense, right? Something that isn't human in some ways, right? What is nonsense sort of, grows beyond, or something that is beyond the compensation of how we make sense in cities, the noise and all of those things, right? Or the idea of what is strange, right? What is unfamiliar or dark and opaque and unconscious, right? Something that is always beyond or even the idea of the non-human, particularly in terms of the stray, which is something that not just beyond the anthropological understanding of cities, but also there's the division between the humans and the animals with which we are working, right? But I would also kind of push to sort of bring back the questions not to the human in some sense, but to think about that these histories are very much tied into questions of power, right? The idea of what becomes ungeographic, or what is beyond human, or what is considered as non-human, right? So the exclusion of what is outside is also a very inclusionary way of saying something. It's always a question of power. It involves some ways, right? In that. So questions of race and gender and the whole ideas of slavery are sort of tied into what makes sense and what doesn't, right? In many ways. Particularly the questions of darkness, right? Which is a way, something that is strange and paranoia and fear, right? It has that. But it's also that when something becomes ungeographic or something is non-human, is there a possibility in that space to think about what the human is not yet, right? So it's sort of a space to think about questions of what the human hasn't become yet, right? And these are questions of relationships between species, between space and what is not human, between what makes sense and what is nonsense, and how people pay attention to or make sense of intensities and densities in public spaces, or even the idea of uncanny and not, which I would kind of feel, I mean, as you described, there's something about the ordinariness to this uncanny, right? It's a very ordinary thing that we're describing as uncanny, but there's, the uncanny is because it sort of disappears, right? It doesn't have that sense of transparency, right? But so there's possibilities of exploring ideas of what also where, human is not in some sense a fixed category, right? It's an evolving thing. So is there also a space where the idea of human can be extended through the exploration of what you're doing, right? And because you're already doing it with the medium, right? The film is sort of explores it beyond the anthropological limits, right? What you can see. So does, the softwares that you're using, the sound and the film, they're already sort of surpassing the anthropological limit. But the inquiry also can actually think about what are the ways in which we can extend a notion of human or a notion of what it means to be. And I say that because, who is considered a human and who is not is also a question of power, right? Based on caste and gender and race. So to sort of connect those larger ideas to what you're doing. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. If maybe we can have quick responses from Pranay and Devanshi, since they haven't responded and Raunak has already.
I just wanted to add one thing for Pranay, because I had to leave in the middle. So just for the ED, I think there is connect to the fictional for sure. right? The reason I mentioned Murder in Mahim is because for some people, the same space was considered like a taboo space, or a space where things happen which they can't talk about, or and for some people, it was actually a space of intimacy. So play with it. Don't go and look for a fixed sense of this one place which is eerie. It's not some haunted house somewhere. The same place can become many things. That's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Sorry, can I go? I'll just quickly
Yeah.
respond to Kush's question, where you were saying the conversations were not directly, as in the direct recording was not put in the audios. Is that what you were asking? Yeah.
I was just curious about the decision making. So it's not a criticism. It's just a...
No, I got it. The reason being that the conversations did not happen planned. The 4 conversations that I said, they were not planned. They just happened. One, because I was shooting during the COVID time, so people were really conscious about what I was shooting, and are you going? And they were, especially during COVID, the street was not allowed to be laid out. So they were like, are you from the police, or are you a journalist? And so such questions, and then they just happen to become conversations. So I don't really have the real-time recordings. So they're a collective of the experiences.
Maybe I'll like collectively respond to Kush and Sarovar. I mean, one, I could see this through the ordinary uncanny is, I mean, there also comes out this question of the familiar. And I can also, I can think of the story of Sigmund Freud. So he was in a wagon, okay? And as soon as he entered the wagon, he was shocked because he sort of saw this man with this sort of coat and this hat. And after a moment of time, he realized that it was his own reflection. So, I mean, through this, what I want to say that there is this very sort of this strange small displacement that happens between the familiar and the unfamiliar. And I mean, like the uncanny space also in a sense never exists. I mean, you can't sort of construct the uncanny space through a particular spatial configuration. So, and second, I mean, to sort of this embrace the space of the darkness, I would like to go back to the vagabond, because the vagabond through its sense sort of through its nature occupies the space of the nomad, which sort of is constantly intersecting maybe with the space of the state. And the space of the state might be more static and bounded by institutions, but at the same time, the space of the nomad is more smooth and flowing. So, I mean, that gives an interesting point of how do you sort of embrace this darkness, embrace this space of the nomad or the unsafe space. And it's also about subjectivities and positions that you take, which sort of make the uncanny. So, I mean, I guess that's it.
Yeah.
You should, Pranay, Sarnath had a exhibition, Sarnath Banerjee, on the ED. And if you can find something on it on the net, he's never taken it out as a book, but it was a sound file based and like graphic based exhibit, which was very interesting on this idea. And he worked on Bombay and Delhi.
So Sarovar, I think you were saying something about Devanshi when you went to get your chai. So if you could remember.
Yeah, sorry, Devanshi.
Okay.
I will try and remember later, because today is just not one of my best days.
Okay. Okay, we come back to it, Devanshi. Okay, so thanks so much. Let's move on because we have 30 minutes and 2 more presentations. So we'll have the 2 presentations, and maybe we can draw some of these discussions back in the end as well. Yeah. So who's next? Last second. Lost my. Yeah, Himanshi, sorry. Himanshi.
Yeah, I'll share my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, can you see the screen?
Yes, but it's a blank screen, no?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
hello all. My thesis is titled The Architecture of Shadows. As architecture students, we visit sites and draw observations and conclusions from case studies. And so, my initial idea of working with shadows and its conditions is inspired by two buildings, one being IIM Ahmedabad and the other being the Tower of Shadows. What we understand through both of these examples is that shadows are able to create comfortable inner conditions.
In which, like, the world building, which is actually where I thought about telling you about this website, is there
Kushita, can you mute yourself? Thank you.
These inner conditions provide both security and ensure sufficient ventilation. Through my initial observation, I started mapping a flowchart where I explored the experiences that shadows are able to evoke and its practice. In the first flowchart, I referred to Leonardo da Vinci's perspective on shadow drawing, where he emphasizes on 4 principal methods to achieve shadows. In the second flowchart, I was looking at shadows with respect to the activities it generates. Next, I referred to works by Anand Sonecha and Giorgio Chirico. The similarity between both of these are that there is an emphasis upon the relationship of the architectural scale of built form and the shadow created on a surface. These drawings also enable the experience of layering by providing depth to architectural forms. Next, I started drawing shadow conditions that created spaces of pause and formed cooler environments in public spaces. This is an example where the space gets mutually shaded by the shadow of the underground passageway and the shade of the tree. This allows it to become a space of pause and transaction. Concern. Shadows affect the quality of space by making depth and distance ambiguous and comprehending surfaces or edges through unconscious interpretations. Aim, how small pockets of space get formed in the city which become habitable because of shadow conditions that get formed within them. To locate and study the habitable crevices within the larger urban fabric that are formed through the shadow conditions and patterns. Objective, the architecture of intimacy in the public realm through the crevices in the neighborhood, which create cooler spaces for certain practices. Research question, how do shadows create intimate conditions and configurations of space within a neighborhood? We have often seen design strategies like jalis, open work walls, pergolas, etc. that help create shadows for varied purposes. I think although we have a wide range of strategies to create shadows, the way in which they enable human relationships has not been studied enough. Due to this, shadows get overseen and most of the time become effects instead of being spatially thought of during design processes. When I began with my fieldwork, I realized that locals use certain spaces to carry out activities unconsciously according to different times of the day. This cultural manifestation of shadows allows interaction of space and people to be shaped spatially and therefore produce architectural forms. Therefore, this research shall investigate how shadows and sciography shape the experience of space silently. To study these aspects, I started looking at public spaces on a neighborhood level. I studied the intimate and pocket conditions that were created between built forms, which produce interactive conditions. These spaces were observed at 3 different periods of the day. During the field visit, I came across this lane, which began with having an entrance to the house on one side and a toilet on the other. The veranda of this house received a sufficient amount of light. This veranda is generally used by the woman of the house for drying clothes. As I moved forward, I saw a peepal tree that had diyas and images of deities near it. As I walked through this dark space, I could only see a thin stroke of light entering the space. Though dimly lit, it created a very distinct and clear line that distinguished the dark and the light. Some dull light also made its way through the opening on the concrete floor above. This contrast partially revealed the surfaces of the surrounding built forms. An interesting aspect of this space was that one tree was responsible for creating 2 different experiences. At the ground level, the built form created a dark space beneath where the tree became worshipable. Whereas above, in the presence of bright light, it protects the user from direct sunlight, making the space comfortable. Pocket spaces are small-scaled open areas that form within the larger urban fabric. These spaces are usually accessed by local dwellers who appropriate it for themselves. One such example is this street where these small spaces are getting formed by the proximity of built forms. The advantage of such compact spaces is that they not only allow privacy, but also become spaces of comfort and leisure. The cool environment of this space allows users to use it in the entire day without feeling exhausted due to strong sunlight. This is a corner that happens in the midst of a street. An interesting aspect of it is that one space is used for different activities. Therefore, this corner creates an active environment around itself. These activities are operated by the changing shadows, as during morning, due to strong sunlight, the space is used for drying clothes by women, whereas by evening, teenage boys use this space for collective gaming or watching cricket. Therefore, it can be said that shadows here are shaping the function and type of activity that emerges from this corner. While specifically observing these three houses, I understood that the activities which usually take place within the house, in this case, have reversed. Washing machines, storage cupboards, washing utensils, and playing on the staircase. All of these activities and objects have become an extension to the house. Therefore, I can conclude that these activities are governed by the built forms that create shadowed spaces, making a user feel a sense of security and comfort. This house forms a corner space where the shadow of the roof creates a comfortable outside environment for the user, which also functions as an extra room outside the house. Above the roof, the compound wall creates a shadowed space which is used for leisure activities. Conclusions. Today, we as architects think about shadows and objects individually. Even when we design, we usually sketch the design layout first and think about shading devices later, or vice versa. By doing this, it means that I am simply confining shadows to the openings that happen within the length of walls. Due to this, shadows get overlooked and are seen just as an additional element of design and not an active part of it. We forget that shading devices alone do not help to create the feel of space, but also when we design built forms like arches, doors, niches, corridors, etc., have their own impact on space. The research question, how do shadows create intimate conditions and configurations of space within a neighborhood, directs us towards building the thought of the nuanced rhythm of natural light and shadow. The observations made in the initial part of the research suggest that pocket spaces are more likely to be used by people as they provide privacy and a cooler environment. Therefore, the publicness of a space cannot be defined by its scale. Interactive spaces can also happen within compact environments. Sufficient ventilation, the function of space, and comfortable environments are principally thought of while designing space. As architects, we strive to create spaces of comfort and work within the envelope of walls. We think that by making closed spatial enclosures, we can hold people together. Thus, the entire effort of an architect's practice is to design that enclosure and what happens inside it. The examples discussed before explored the ways in which spaces outside built forms give rise to interactive conditions. These outside spaces become a hub for collective activities. Therefore, my study looks at the way in which people gather outside buildings in tropical climates, where shadows formed outside of superstructures create conditions of coming together. Further, the study opens up different parameters and methods in which such a question can be approached. These include ideas of scale, skin, structure, and densities of space, which are most favorable for human interaction. Shadows play a major role in controlling heat. They therefore create an imaginary boundary, thus allowing the body enough freedom to express without limiting them into physical confinements. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Himanshi. I think and I'm just kind of reminded of this the book In Praise of Shadows, and I mean, in that sense, that book talks about this idea of a Japanese aesthetic, but predominantly talks about the inside space, the idea of the home, And here you're talking about something else. You're talking about the outside space or the in-between space. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of talk. And you said that it's not enough spoken about enough, the kind of relationships that this creates. So I'm just wondering if it's also possible for you to push that beyond, only the climatological, but kind of really looking at what does it mean to create relationships, deeper sense of relationships. What is the aesthetic that gets produced through multiple ideas of, how shadows are produced and created, and what is the aesthetic, that it produces. So, yeah, but we'll come back to that. Thanks for the presentation. And we'll come to the final presentation, Jatan. Jatan,
yeah, I'll share
go ahead.
So, and first of all, this is kind of presentation is nicely timed in the end of the day. So we are all tired. So either we sleep, daydream, or see the presentation. We'll be in the space of dream. So to kind of start with the thesis is to understand spatiality of dream experiences. And to start with, I'm looking to locate myself in the thesis as well. I would like to talk about two notions which are kind of observed around me growing up in a Jain Baniya family in Mumbai. And one is about the notion of purity. And this comes from a series of conversations with my friends and family. And it is often said that the word pav pav for bread gets its name because it's kneaded by baker's legs, pav. And this imagination of the bakery, where the sweat and the dirt of labor kind of pours into the food, seems like a nightmare for a purity imagination. The other notion which I want to talk about is of usability. Recently in lockdown, I made a proposal to my family to kind of cut open a window in the wall between the bedroom and the hall so that there's some mischievous interaction and so on. This proposal was, however, countered by the argument that this window is almost useless. The idea of enclosed bedroom became important so as to bound one's intimacies for it to not flow into the living room, which is understood as a sacred space. And these traces the traces of these notions of purity, usability, rationality are also found in the processes of spatial imagination. And since last couple of years, I myself have been weirdly remembering dreams, and quite vividly I've been remembering dreams, and I started archiving them orally or by writing, sketching of dreams and so on. So there was a growing interest in the dream, and often in our dreams we encounter what we call most bizarre, unusual, and these experiences might leave us completely disturbed or in a remorse of not being able to relive it again. And the dreams also challenge the notions which I spoke about earlier. So the argument is this, that the current spatial imaginations are structured around the logics of purity, usability, rationality, whereas dreams challenge this logic and open up new ways of imagining space. So the research question is, what is the spatiality which holds our experiences of dreams? So for this, I'm looking at dreams of 4 people, one being myself. I'll introduce the other 3. One is a Sadhvi Jinanda Sagar, and she is a Jain monk whom I have known for a very long time. And she often sees absurd figures and landscapes in her dream, and because of which she recites them and finds meaning of these in the religious scriptures. The other is a friend of mine, a batchmate actually, who from since a very long time has been reciting dreams to her family and friends, and she also remembers dreams vividly, and she in gathering, and so she narrates these dreams and recites them. One more is a mother of my friend who often has very disturbing dreams, and to resolve them, she talks to astrologers to find meanings of them and solution and so on. So there are 3 understandings which I borrowed from 3 philosophers. One from Bataille, in his essay The Labyrinth, he distinguishes between the idea of knowledge and being, where knowledge functions in coherences and totalities, and being escapes this. The ability to be comprehensive, being escapes this ability. These are limits of knowledge, and being exists beyond it and also in between the ruptures of the structure of knowledge. Gaston Bachelard, in his book The Earth and the Reveries of Repose, in the chapter The Labyrinth, builds a relationship between dream experiences and the labyrinthine experiences, when one experiences lostness in both of them. And the experience of labyrinth is not of a larger optic of kind of navigating the view and solving the maze, but in the closeness of it through visceral and almost like licking the walls of the labyrinth. The third drawing is of the from Walter Benjamin, the idea of play, then in that what he talks about gambling and many ideas of play, he suggests a new way to engage with the ruptures, but it is not an incident where we kind of are petrified in confusion, but an opening of a chance where we understand world in its immediacy through discreteness, unveiling, and like while gambling, where one works not through the master logic, but in the bodily presence of the mind, where one takes bets and chances. I would like to open dreams through the processes and various exploration which I undertook. The dreams were first interviewed, and these were voice or video recorded, and these were kind of laid out and opened up into these networks and narratives and small drawings. And these were rethought in forms of poems, which are condensed, allowing multiple allusions and imaginations at the same time. I'll open up one dream. This is a dream of a Jain Muni in an endless desert of horizon and people. While walking, I saw a pair of eyes staring at me. I ran into an opening in a wall. The light from the another opening ahead casted a shadow on me and eclipsed in the space I was in. I passed through the light. An old woman sitting with contempt and shredded in tiredness sat on the swing in the shade. Unaware of the terror to be rained upon, I grabbed her hand, pulled her further into the wall. With our eyes eclipsed by the light, we went into another wall, into a space filled with darkness. I thought I was lost finally, with no traces of myself behind. But Godot knows. Breaking all the half-open door, it casted itself in front of me, to whom I bowed. So the Godot is a Kutchi word for an untamed bull. So this is the entire painting of the dream which I spoke about. I want to kind of continue in the process of this drawing and understanding dream. As the next steps of this painting, I also kind of look at the dioramas which could hold the miniature boxes which could hold the experience of dream, and also where you can enter in them by peeking into them. But what was kind of but in both these forms, there was a boundary between the world of the dreams and the world of the waking state. And so what happens when these kind of dreams transgress the boundaries of the drawing page or the kind of the box of the diorama? So I'll open up 8 dreams ahead, and these are in the forms of poems and drawings of spatial installations in the space of the schools to kind of nudge the imagination of the space of institution, which is imagined as a rational space. The installations are drawn from my own associations and experiences of school spaces, and at the same time, through the dreams of poems of dream. So these are not the drawings of the dream itself, but the drawing exploration on how can dreams nudge the space of waking life. This is a poem of a Jain Muni. So the next steps which I took, the path curled as a dried leaf bent upwards. The horizon of vast sea and desert eclipsed upon me. 2 horizons closed as a mouth of demon. It subsumed me in the orb. I chose to venture into the depth of the sea, but it was the depth of the horizon. I drifted towards it. I reached the edge of the infinite horizon where I worshipped an ivory idol. So this is and this is a space of a server room, which is always kind of locked and hardly we ever see what's inside. But when you kind of peek into the small keyhole, there's, Hello.
Go ahead, Jatan.
Yeah. So when you kind of see into this small keyhole, you see an infinite world. So this is the next scene. I climbed down and water filled under my feet, lustrous water, reflecting the sky, but green. Under the reflection, a thick black forest, hair like membranes, swayed along with the waves, eclipsing the infinite horizon. So this is also a dream of a Jan Muni, where the infinite visceral material takes over her path. And this, in this space of the school, is also balcony space on the edge of the building where the water pours directly, and there's always this fungus and algae on the floor. And it is also a space where students often have lunch, and it is kind of, and together students have lunch. And then through this miniature table, the small table, the space is imagined as a vast landscape. And this is a space then not for the physical body to inhabit, but the oniric experience to inhabit the space. So this is one of my own dreams. In the midst of vast dry earth, on a black road, he sat, in the arms of warm body. Few mourned around us. A friend of mine asked me to live with him. Trusting him, I left to a marshy puddle where crocodiles resided. Still idols, cracking from their stillness, they rose in from the marsh, unveiling their body and torso and legs of a human. The monsters crowded my friend. Resolved to eat him, I ran away. Into weathered wall, we were enveloped by the walls and darkness. Crawling through the walls, brushing to our skin, we refuged behind a metal door, where once monsters were captured. We had entered a prison, a ray of light piercing through this subterranean darkness. So in this space, what you see in the image, in the left is the edge, kind of on the edge of the ground of is a nala, and this is also a miniature landscape where the kind of ramp is going inside the space, and then you see a small window where it's suggesting a space underneath this vast groundness, and it changed the imagination of a ground where underneath is a kind of dark labyrinth where one can kind of get lost. Brown viscous fluid erupted from the commode into the dark room, heaped in onto floors, molds on wall, and stalactites on the ceiling. So this is one of my friend's mother's dream, and this space is of pantry, and it is also that it is the pantry is in the bottommost floor of the building, and above which is server rooms and the 2 toilets. So it's a stack of the pantry is located in the bottommost part of the stack of the toilet. And in this a shaft is cut out straight from the toilet into this kitchen. This disrupts the notion of kitchen as a sacred and pure space. So I stood at the top of a mound of hollows of burrows. These bores of ground covered with hair all in the inside are where the horn-sheep monsters live. So this is one of my own dream, and recently after lockdown, when the school opened, the weeds and the vegetations were cut and kept in the heap, and there's this imagination of a huge burrow alongside it, where the temporalities of the material are accentuated with the permanence and the elongated act of kind of burrowing the ground. It also suggests a subterranean world which holds the nocturnal experience, as this subterranean world is also where the residues of the whole world flow into. A group of people sitting on chairs. Get that girl, they ordered. In fear, I ran from there into hanging clothes, hiding myself and my shadow. So this is a dream of my friend, and this space, the ground where these raves are, is often space through which, through the compound wall, people kind of stare from outside into the inside of the space of the stills. And this space of the stills is also where students play, etc. And they also look outside and so on. But now these huge curtains allow a play in between the space of hiding, of peeking, of unveiling. And also this idea of huge ground is playfully kind of disrupted through this. I was shutting, opening the door, passing into the wall beside me. A voice from the other side called, "Take a bath with me." The smell of the shit and the wet stone beneath my feet. I ran to wash my hands, smelled them. I peed all over my body, a call from inside, through the window, in the door. So this is one of my own dream, and the space of this washroom holds that visceral quality of that wetness and the smell. So this is one of the washrooms in the school itself. And this drawing on the wall kind of tweaks and plays with the idea of perspective, where in the reflection, where you see where you see the reflection of the reflection, and this bound and kind of plays with also the boundedness of the space and allows chance encounters to happen. The pigeon entered into my skin, and the softness of his skin and muscle, to the pungent smell of its shit, I petrified. So this is a dream of my friend, and this space is it's the topmost kind of floor of the school, and which is kind of least surveilled. So this space becomes a spot for the students to kind of hang out and spend moments in hiding. And through the dreams, this space is kind of nudged to hold that moment of brushing of the skins and the warm, soft flesh. So to conclude now, the thesis kind of suggests a expanding kind of spatial catalog. And in the experience of dreams opened up above, there is a sense of immediacy which shapes them. The space is unveiled or morphed or doesn't allow us to foresee it. In this, there's an uncertainty of things which keeps us on the edge of the cliff. There is an experience the experience is in the immediacy, where we enter into the ruptures of the totality of the world, which shapes our ability to comprehend things. The experience of immediacy prevails in incoherences and instability of spaces, and invites one to play a game of chance. So on instability, so these are the affordances, and on instability, dreams are kind of constantly building, morphing, collapsing. It is through the way one travels, it kind of builds, the space kind of builds the way one experiences it. And in that it's not one, but a series of these experiences. And these produces incoherences, and where one cannot map or navigate the dream in its entirety. And it's kind of, you can hear me? My shows, man.
Yes, we can hear you.
So it doesn't prevail in the kind of totality, but in the kind of prevails in the fragmented and kind of incoherence. And this allow multiple logics to kind of coexist. This game of this coherences and instability are experienced in immediacy, and it allows one to take chances, gamble, and place their bets where there is no one coherent logic, but through which one works there's no one coherent logic through which one works, but it is the bodily presence of the body through which one kind of gambles. So the experiential categories, enriches in dreams, there's no sense of kind of continuity. The continuity is disrupted in dreams, where the time and spaces are bent or elongated into itself, creating these multiple jumps. In and out of scale is about the collapse of the anthropological scale, which is kind of where it is not always the body, the physical body, which inhabits the space, but the honoric which inhabits the space. And the idea of standard body is irrelevant in the dreams. Multiple scale dream experience offers multiple scales of inhabitation with a tight small space, which would be kind of morphed into a vast infinite space suddenly. Visceral materiality reveals to us deep interiority of ourselves, where we are not able to comprehend things, but it pierces right through our skins, and we kind of think through the skin. Defamiliarization allows us to see things in the new light by hiding few things, and it reveals to us new ways of imagining the same thing. The discreteness allows one to play with it, like a gamble, where we escape the consciousness and the automatized process of living. The vastness, on the sublime experience, the vastness makes us feel minuscule and leaves us vulnerable and helpless and negligible in this limitless world. So that's it.
Thanks, Jatan, for framing this as the three limits of knowledge, the phenomenology of dreams through the idea of the visceral and the game of chance that you frame it through, but also kind of speaking about the limits of representing, so not drawing out the dream, but trying to kind of work with the mode of thinking through the poem and the spatial installations as this kind of staying between the state of sleeping and being awake, right? The space of the dream and the waking state. So yeah, so let's have for Himanshi and Jatan. Maybe we can take a minute break, and we might just run over by a little bit.
You're taking a break or something?
No, we're just giving everybody like a minute or two to put together their thoughts. No, it's not a break. I mean, it's 6 o'clock, so.
May I just start?
Sure.
Yeah. Jatin, I mean, I just didn't want your narration of dreams and accompanying poems and sort of image-based understandings of how they come together to end. I really wanted that to just continue. I think it's quite a befitting sort of conclusion, if it were, of this symposium, because in some ways it is returning us to questions of knowledge, but also logics with which we understand what is knowledge, and there is this beautiful thesis on moving past to what Jatan calls logics of purity, usability, rationality, and sort of really sort of drawing attention to one's own experience at the level of dreams. So Jatan, I was very sort of taken by how you started documenting and archiving your own dreams, but then also a range of people whose dreams became part of this storytelling, right? And then how carefully, I wanted to ask you, were those poetic expressions of dreams, were those your constructions or something that those people wrote them and then you presented on their behalf, or what was that? Your construction?
So the way it kind of got formed is through videos and the voice recordings and interviews which happened. There was this construct, of course these were kind of written by me, but then these were coming also from the kind of the way they were kind of narrating the dream. So before the poems, the way I was kind of opening up the dream into those networks and sketches were all coming from one voice recording or video recording, which I would revisit again and again and look closely at what were the experiences closely kind of which opened it up. So that was briefly kind of the process.
Yeah, no, that was that layering and that sort of bringing together different voices, but in a common expression. I think there's a certain skill to it, and you really were able to express that very skillfully. So I wanted to commend you on that, because those poems actually become materials for not just dreaming, but materials for design. And so I just wanted to sort of highlight that as well. I also couldn't help but think of Borges and sort of the idea of the labyrinth and Borges' own sort of text on dreams. But in this triadic formation between knowledge, experience, and action, or kind of Bataille, Bachelard, and Benjamin that you bring in, sort of you locate yourself at the intersection of that triad. It's interesting for me to sort of say that, no, please do not bring in affordances. It's interesting. I mean, I was just trying to sort of, we were having this conversation, and I was hoping that I hope there is no anchoring in affordances, because you're providing an alternative. You're providing a different way to still root it in some physical dimension of space ideas of scale. I love that gigantic, what seemingly became a giant balcony or a terrace because of the very deliberate play of the dining set in that space, right? So I think you're already working with very material ways of imagining space. Glitches is a very deliberate attempt. I would really encourage you to sort of think about this power of glitches, because glitches also has a very negative connotation. There's a glitch that means it needs to be fixed, but glitches open up possibilities for juxtaposing realities, scales, materials, experiences that are otherwise seen as quote unquote not pure, to sort of use your own metaphor. So I think there, within queer studies, there is this sort of a theorization of the glitch as a way to sort of, and queer in technology, science, technology, society studies, there is this theorization of the glitch as sort of being deeply immaterial as much as it is technological. Sort of hold on to that and rethink your decision to sort of really come back to affordances. The reason I sort of I'm uncomfortable with affordances, particularly in this case, is because if my reading of Gibson is correct, there was this, Gibson's notion of affordance separates the physical from the very experience and subjectivity of the individual. And what you started with and what you continue to anchor your project around is this deep subjectivity, not just yours, but also a range of people. So I think there is this sort of a disconnect in how or why Gibson's framework of the affordance, or the conceptual framework, or the conceptual sort of tool of affordances might or might not be useful here. So that was one. Himanshi, were those charcoal drawings?
Could you ask again?
Were those charcoal? Were those drawings in
Yes.
charcoal? Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Sort of, kind of two-dimensional, but kind of, the darkness of charcoal really coming through in terms of sort of emphasizing this point about shadows. But what I was sort of drawn to is you started by asking how shadows create intimate conditions for a certain kind of social life to take form and shape. So I think the thesis starts with a very positive, you're ascribing a positive value to shadows, that shadows in the public life begin to bring people together, become opportunities for interaction, become opportunities for social relationships. But when and for whom is shadow unfavorable? So think, and this is I think going back to Rupali's point, that bring in the social dimensions of shadow. What is it shadowing? Who is shadow favoring? What is a kind of relationship that comes into view because of a shadow? As much, that kind of, as contradictory as it sounds, but there's a certain kind of a coming into view of a relationship, but also shadows that one begins to be fearful of or want to not be part of because of the kinds of violence associated with shadow, both historically but also in society. And I also wanted to ask you, how have you distinguished between shadow and shade? Because at places I felt that your project was more a thesis on shade, considering the emphasis that you were placing on architectural physical elements that offer shade or build shade for certain kinds of activities. And how are you claiming this place for shadows as a concrete architectural element? So I'll pause there. Yeah.
Okay, so for Himanshi, right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I really liked the idea of you wanting to track shadows in architecture. That was great because I think yesterday or day before when I did the jury, we were talking about architectural photography and the relationship to presenting architectural form through the built form and through shadow and light. So it was a very interesting beginning, and I think what would be interesting to extend this into is where you showed these images of Ahmedabad and this other building. Sorry, I can't recall the name.
The Tower of Shadows.
हाँ.
It's in Chandigarh.
Okay. हाँ. So ये जो architect, तुम्हारा one side of your presentation was the beginning was located on architectural form and relationship to shadows in a sense, and the second part was the idea of the everyday and the ordinary, and really interesting sketches. And what is interesting is one side you use photograph and the other side you use sketches. Also, because when you move, so somewhere it'll be interesting to look at this tension of architectural form in photography and architectural form as the use of shadows and light, right? And so this notion of, like, in North Indian cities, a lot of the conversation is about dhoop in winters, because there is some joke going on which I don't know. Okay, push that was a okay. So so what will be interesting is to think of it not just in shadow, not just at the relationship of form, which is from the ordinary to the kind of the magnificent in architectural photography and architectural form, but also to think of it as in relationship to light. And you do that, but I think if you articulate it, it will be more interesting. I mean, there's a book which is not about entirely about light and shadow, Sunlight on a Broken Column. There's a lot of, I mean, I always think of literature when I think of light and shadow. Sorry, and it'll be interesting to think about these things. For Jatan, very interesting, very ambitious to read Bataille at your age, extremely painful man. So well done. But it would have been just nicer if you had also looked at Jung, Jung's Red Book, especially because Jung actually makes a set of drawings around his dreams. I don't know if you've seen it. Jung's Red Book was released last year. It was in custody for 30 years after his death. And it is a set of drawings on his relationship and the structure of dreams, which is very different from how Freud, of course, talks about it. Also, by the way, just so you know, in the last two presentations, in my exhaustion, I also made a drawing. Because I was like, okay, I should get inspired by the students. In your presentation, it was very interesting. Of course, I have a certain personal obsession with the idea of the horizon. So to think of the dream of that Jain lady, monk. Okay. On horizon is very interesting. The other book that comes to my mind, which is not entirely about dreams, but since you mentioned this Jain woman, is Osho's From Sex to Superconsciousness. So the spiritual as a horizon, which then folds itself into dreams. Okay. It's also available in Hindi, by the way, and available in Marathi, whatever language you want to read it. In Hindi, it's called Sambhog Se Samadhi Tak. The reason I'm mentioning this specific book is not just because I like mentioning it, but also because those dreams had a particular relationship to the idea of the horizon, which is a form that dwells itself very strongly into ideas of consciousness, transcendence, like if you read Ramakrishna Paramhansa's biography, he also talks about how one day he was just standing by the lake and a set of birds flew into the sky. So what are the kind of hinges that the dreams of different kinds of people, because their pursuits are different. Like I always dream of houses, and my whole life has basically been about shifting houses and constantly dream of houses. And a very interesting plan, sab kuch. So just to see why her dreams had this specific kind of quality. And I would have also liked if you had made more canvases, more paintings, and of different kinds, to kind of connect to this. I think they were really great what you did, but more, dil mange more. So yeah, and I would suggest, see, the thing is, Batail is torment. Okay, in his work there is a lot of torment, and that is a dark horizon in a sense. The people that one can, of course, read on dreams, as Kush said, is Borges. Is also to think of someone like Salvador Dali. Thinking of not just Dali's work. There's a very fantastic painting of his, of this woman and pomegranate and something it's called. Look it up. The Dream Before Awakening. So to also enter this through surrealism and art rather than just through the philosophical and the theoretical. क्योंकि वो आपको थ्योरिस्ट का अपना गेम चल रहा है. बाताइल का बहुत डार्क सीन था. As my reading of him has always been very dark. And you use Walter Benjamin. Who's the third one you used? Walter तो sweet है.
Gaston
Bachelard. Bachelard is very neat. Who is the theorist on dreams? Well, I mean, I would definitely tell you to look at Jung, Red Book. I don't think you can even download that book, but you'll find it somewhere online. Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks a lot. Okay, guys, if I fade out, is there an issue? And Prasad, I can't hear you.
Just Prasad, just one. Let Prasad Khanolkar say, and then you can come in.
No, I was just telling. I was requesting Saror to wait. Fading out, fading in. Kar rahi hai.
Told you.
गाना वाना बजाओ, फिर मेरे को रखो, प्रसाद entertained.
Okay. I mean, two quick comments, Himanshi. I kind of like the idea of exploring the aesthetics of shadows, but I felt like the ideas of shadow in your case was very much tied to the sun, right? In some ways. And the shadow doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the shadow, the sun. Like, I'm sure there's a sense of, because cities in some sense, got an urbanized both technologically, but also in terms of media, right? Where the question of shadows can be explored architecturally beyond just the concept of sun and light and shadows, which is like an old architectural inquiry. And also, the way in which you actually describe the shadow is interesting because it doesn't become a sort of a blanked out one term, although you call it a shadow, but there's, a different, there's a certain gradient, right, to what a shadow is, right? Also, what Kush was talking about, the aesthetics of shadows in different cases might be very different. So if it's an inquiry really into the idea of shadows, I feel like you want to explore it a lot more, in detail, both what maybe the dark horizon of the shadow is and the light horizon of the shadow is, in both sort of senses. But also like, street lights and also what kind of shady businesses go on in shadows, right? And it sort of brings back to the idea of a certain question of opacity, right? What happens when things get opaque? What I think Pranay was talking about, darkness and the uncanny and the unfamiliar, right? Something that is not transparent to our senses, but also to the eye in some ways. And so a lot of things happen in the shadows of both consciousness, but also the eye. And I think that requires more detailed exploration of it. And I think, your drawings sort of start doing that, and I wish you to take it forward. For Jatan, I would actually be interested in your idea of awakening, if you're also thinking about the question of dreaming. And to go back to, the Benjamin has a concept of awakening when he's also talking about dreaming, right? And his idea of dreaming is very space bound, right? He'll describe a room and there's furniture and everything that is there, which is, a dream can also is in many ways localized by the limit of the space, but it also allows you to sort of move beyond that limit, right? And then in this back and forth between the limit and the limitlessness is where somewhere the awakening is. And his, the idea of dreaming also comes from a sense of that we are, our ideas of dream world have extended beyond night and day and sleep, and that's the idea of dreaming is sort of extended into media, into what you're watching on television. All of that also draws in. So it was interesting for me is where you sort of talk about a dream, but also localize it to what is around you in many ways, right? But then I would actually also think about, how would you think about the idea of awakening in a dream? And I don't mean awakening in the sense of, some rise of consciousness or those kind of things, but what you're calling about the rupture of in the dream space, right? Like there's a threshold experience in the dream itself, right? When the time between the sleep and the awakening, like you're getting up, we're sort of moving back and forth, right? What someone else would have called the interstitial space, where the limits are there, but also not there. Something sort of opens up there, both architecturally, but also in terms of as a threshold experience of life, where the limits of knowledge are being constantly worked with. So I would be interested in also sort of exploring that medium, because it's, all of these 5 last ones are, more about the thresholds of language and medium and what we can and cannot do with what we pay attention to in our world. Okay, thanks.
Okay, do you all want to respond, Himanshi and Jatan?
Yeah, can I respond to Kush's question? Yeah, so he asked that who is the shadow favoring, and I think in my study, I realized that in my case it is favoring the neighborhood more, also because of its scale. So the scale of a chawl is very different than the scale of a building, and also he said that there is a fear related to the shadows that Kush was saying. So I'd like to give an example here. So when it gets dark at night and when I'm out, I usually prefer walking through this neighborhood actually, because even if it's dark, but it gives a sense of security. And a dark space usually feels unsafe when it is isolated. So when I walk through the lane where my building is situated, it's usually very isolated. So it gets very unsafe. whereas in a neighborhood, it feels safe. It gives a sense of security. Yeah. And also that how is shadow and shade different? So shadow is like a dark kind of outline on a surface, whereas in case of shade, I think there's also some light. There's also a play of light along with that shade. So the shade is mostly the shade isn't completely dark. I mean, it has some presence of light in it, so it's lighter than a shadow. So that's how it's different.
You're done, Himanshi?
Yeah.
So I must confess one thing. I have not read Gibson and his theories of affordances. These are rather coming from the extended learnings. So what I was understanding through what I was calling affordances were where the three kind of categories in which dream experience can be held, or the dream experience hold these things. This relation is what I was thinking through. The incoherences, instability, and game of chance is what kind of produce dream experiences, or the vice versa. The dream experiences produce and hold these things. That's what I was meant. And in that sense, I think the word affordances is kind of not rightly put over there. But these are rather allowances and the relations. And on awakening, on what Prasad said, on the awakening and this kind of swaying between dreams and sleep, this actually kind of this partial installation, I think, were the kind of first step towards kind of bringing dreams into waking life, and then now kind of looking back to this swaying moments again and again. And in the process also, this actually this partial, the kind of my thorough understanding on these, how kind of dreams nudge this partial, this space, and what does it mean to make us nudge the space to a dream experience or something, did really come in the last 1 or 2 weeks. So I think that as a process now, as a further process, I can take this up and think about the threshold of limit and limitless, limit these things. And Baki. Thank you.
Okay, Prasad.
No, Himanshi responded.
Yeah, Himanshi responded. Yeah.
To both the things. Acha, okay. No, I was thinking, and again coming back to the form question, like I was thinking that where does, because fiction kind of came again and again in the previous panel, like when does dream become fiction? No, in the sense that what is the relationship between dream and fiction? No, in a sense that it's is it fictional? Is it like, how do you kind of work that out for yourself? And of course, I mean, there are plenty of like in your explorations, Jatan, the use of the poem form and the installations and the drawings, like these are moments to kind of continue the dream, in a sense that they continue dream into a non-dream situation, and it allows those possibilities to think of space in different ways. It allows those many possibilities. So So I was just thinking about where to locate this work. Like, for example, why doesn't, I mean, I feel that like it's still kind of, there is, like Sarovar mentions Dali. I think there is this, like, the critique of Dali is that it's not surreal. Actually, like it doesn't become gibberish. It doesn't become kind of become nonsense, not in the sense of nonsensical, but it still tries to remain within some coherence. No? Like the I'm saying that complete smudging, the complete kind of push, like when you continue the dream, it's as if the dream is trying to take a panga with this world, not trying to erase it, not trying to kind of exert itself as a possible possibility of existence, as a possibility. So, like, I was thinking, why are his poems so coherent? The dream was in. Why is the installation seeking so much? Because the dream was kind of was in, there is a stillness in the dream, stillness of anxiety, like stillness of something. So I was thinking in form, like the dream kind of has this ability to kind of reconfigure those realities for you. That famous Ashtavakra story, Ashtavakra Janagraja story. Okay. वो भी सच वो भी झूठ ये भी झूठ वो भी सच ये भी सच ना वो सच है ना ये सच सिर्फ तुम ही सच that kind of a thing, that kind of a like a that kind of a strange. So that the form, it's still coherent. I feel it's kind of it's, and because it's a kind of in this it is trying to kind of engage with the terms of the non-dream world. It is not trying to get it's not trying to get its terms. मुझे वो लगा actually, so it's kind of, it's like a, like how do you kind of, and because that's important, because that those terms are kind of will take you to another kind of realm, trespass.
Okay, we're already over time, but does anybody else want to add anything from the rest of the panelists, the audience?
I'll just I forgot to respond to Sarovar actually. The suggestion of the Dali and the reason why what Bataille kind of helped me do. The other, I was reading Breton and Dali and other artists as well, the surrealist artists, but usme ho raha tha ki I was not able to kind of understand the new logics of the dreams. And whereas the Bataille could, from Bataille, I could understand and articulate new logics, not just of the dream, but the kind of space of the dream space and dream experience. So Bataille helped me in that. And although I agree that the Bataille is kind of extreme and kind of tormentous.
Actually, Breton, the thing is, Bataille बहुत structure ले आता है, वो structuralist है, उसका problem वो है. और Breton आपको structure तोड़ देता है. और आपका लुई बैनुएल का वो film देखो, Dadaist cinema. Because honestly, one of the toughest things for students from architecture to do is to watch a Louis Buñuel film. I've experimented on students. They start cringing. They're like, नहीं, क्योंकि वो form को पूरा तोड़ देता है आपके लिए. Buñuel, वो उसका 21 मिनट का film है. Do it as a social experiment in your class. Just play the film and see how much cringe happens. Cringe not in the Insta millennial way, but like because he breaks the categories of the formative and the structural. And Andre Breton ka ek book hai Nadia. It's a kind of fiction. Nadia, I don't know all these French things. That's a really interesting book to read. Uske upar ek film bhi bani hai called Jai Ganga by an Indian French guy. Don't ask me why I know all this. But yeah, I think structuralist se dur raho thodi der. Okay, now can I go? Sorry.
Yeah, okay, so I think
no offense to anybody, guys. I've just been on my feet for
yes, Sarovar, we are all leaving now.
What?
We're all leaving.
You have no idea. I've shifted a house in the middle of this. I have run behind electricity, guys, since yesterday, and last night packing boxes of 14 boxes of books, then coming again, blah blah blah. So, and the jury.
Okay, I think so. Since just wait 2 minutes.
मुझे क्या मिलेगा? टॉफी चाहिए, मुझे कुछ चाहिए.
we are ending right now, so I think just to maybe, I mean, I don't think it's possible to sum up the 3 days, but as Kush said, I think this panel is probably a good sort of summing up in some ways of all the questions that we've been discussing and asking, and so I think there's a lot to be done and built up from what has already been brought together here and sort of laid out. I mean, one of the things is about, and what we discussed in this panel, how is knowledge produced, right? What are the structures of knowledge? What are the epistemes of knowledge? And how do we kind of think of world making, right? So I think, I mean, to kind of hold on to that as an idea, and then kind of also looking at then what are our methods, right? What does it mean to kind of, what are the methods? How do you engage with the field? How do you ask questions from there? But how do you enter? Who is the researcher, or what is the role of the researcher? What are your methods of sort of engaging? What are the forms of this engagement? I think there's a lot that has been opened up in that terrain as well. And then, of course, the recurrent question of drawing, but drawing not as, as this kind of representation alone, but this idea of drawing as a way of sort of, I won't call it seeing, of course, ways of seeing and all of that, but we've also kind of realized that there's a limit to seeing. So what does it mean to kind of think of the idea of drawing as a way of sort of engaging, experiencing? I think we need to open up a whole glossary of what that kind of drawing allows, but also like we've invoked this idea of Taussig sort of talking about the drawing out, right? Like the idea of almost sort of exorcism in some ways, the idea of the drawing as a medium, not the medium in its kind of spectral sense. And then I think also really, I mean, all those questions of like who is the audience, how do you sort of position yourself as a researcher, where do you locate yourself, but I think most importantly, I think coming down to questions of that are located in the ideas of space and spatial justice. But and Saro, like the idea of material culture is sort of, implicated in that. It's kind of located within that itself. So I think there are a series of questions that have opened up, and it's fantastic. It really has been a fantastic 3 days of long discussions. I think all of us have copious notes, and I'm sure it'll be wonderful to kind of take this ahead. And really, what will be nice is to also kind of reflect on this next year, to kind of also look at what the trajectories of this kind of thinking through have been. So it's almost like it's not like you're starting from scratch. But I think what is nice about these discussions is as students also move there, and really also what is interesting is that these discussions are also now, because of post-COVID, they're archived, and so I think what will be nice is to kind of really create a larger community around this of discussion, where it's not like this batch has left. If this batch is able to come back and engage, and really kind of also, since we have this long durée friendship where we invite the same reviewers again, I think it'll be nice to kind of extend this discussion. Sarovar is already saying bye. I'm not coming back. But I think what is important is I mean, just last point to come back to this idea of the long question, right, that we began with. Like, how do we, not leave this here, but how do we, pick up these questions again? And I think for the students also, I really don't think you should see this as like a project that ends, right? Like, it's a practice. It's a long question that you hold with you and come back and revisit and say, perhaps this is something that I kind of rethink from here. So yeah. So I think I'll end there. But does everyone have questions? Do the students have questions? The whole, like, not only this panel, because since we're ending, like, everybody, do you all want to say a few last words? Vikram, there's a whole bunch in this class here.
All in black. They are ready for the party tonight.
You're ready for the party already. So Vikram, you have to say 2 last words now, since you're in the foreground.
Black t-shirt.
We can't hear you, you're mute.
I don't have anything to say.
What?
I'm not prepared.
That's not possible. Vikram not having anything to say. Does anybody believe that?
I really don't.
Is there seriously a dress code for the black t-shirt? No, by the black t-shirt is banned in my classroom because this architecture में पूरा कीड़ा भरा हुआ है सब में. Black t-shirt पहन के आ जाएंगे. Prasad is like, ये सब क्या दुनिया है? दूसरा प्रसाद खानोलकर. इससे मेरा क्या लेना है? ये लोग t-shirts का डिस्कशन कर रहे हैं.
Okay.
Okay, guys, have a great time. Have a blast, and you all did fantastically. And thank you for keeping us alive mentally and physically.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody. Yeah, it's been incredible. And hope to see you all in person soon. So let's make that happen too, pandemic permitting, of course. But yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thanks so much.
Very nice. Thanks. Bye-bye.
And thanks to all the students, and thanks everyone. Bye. Enjoy. Let's have a party now.
Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.